Right, hello, welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution, and we're going into part 3 of episode 172, which is called the review, and that means going through the so-called defence strategic review. Um, you're going to get a bit of an idea in that from the title page that I've decided to go with this week, and that's as to how I'm feeling about this as I'm running through this document. So yeah, let's just get on with it then, shall we? So, in terms of the start point, certain terminologies tend to gain my attention, and at this stage, and this is where we're at what is effectively the literal page 64, but in terms of their numbered page number 59, we get the terminology of one defence. Now, obviously, they then follow that up with three insinuated categories of people, training, and education. But terms can be drip fed into the consciousness in many different ways, and that in order to be able to sort of gain acceptability, something that becomes a very common parlance, and so that you don't really think about it too much. And it also then leaves room for the kind of denial that you tend to see, where when it does eventually start to become something more than it was originally claimed, they could still go back to that original claim in the first place. But this is the situation where you're saying it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. Well, it might exist and that, but you really shouldn't worry about it. And then, of course, it exists and it's a good thing. That type of scenario, which seems to be coming up more and more often these days. But I've basically got a problem with this terminology of one defence, because we've got some examples, really, where we can begin with one health, which is obviously the version that you get from the absolute liars and criminals at the WHO, whose obvious draconian pseudoscience demands during the coronavirus, which they didn't even bother to check to see exactly what and if that was anything at all, because it was all pre-prepared anyway. Between them and all of the complicit cult ideologue useful idiots in all the nations of the world, quite literally went about killing millions of people from the so-called response. So that's really something that possibly, when they're using this one scenario as a catch-all, might want to be a little bit caution, a bit of caution around that. Then we've also got things like the one world currency by 2026. That's apparently gaining traction. So kiss goodbye to the mere pretense of any sort of sovereignty. Then, of course, when you get in the one this and the one that, naturally you do get the one world government, with the UN believing they're going to take over, and they're going to be doing that with one global pact at a time. Because we've also had good examples for that one as well, haven't we? Because you had the global compact on migration. That's been working out really well for everybody, hasn't it? So our useful idiots are already fully signed up to all of this guff, and so I've got a problem anytime I see one anything as part of their lexicon, and I've got a particular problem with all of the other areas that, like I say, they're already signed up to. So not a good start in terms of this particular part of their so-called review. Right, so continuing on. When they start to talk about this one defence, we can run through some of the lowlights. And we get to point 6, which I suppose in some ways that should frighten the life out of any normal thinking military man, because they want to elevate the importance of civil servants working alongside the military. Because yeah, that sounds like a genius idea, doesn't it? I'm sure they can look forward then in the UK in particular, being told that they should stand down by the likes of the civil service Muslim network, because that will be genius, won't it? And just in case anybody doesn't understand this, yes, this civil service Muslim network is actually something that exists in the UK within the government. Link in the description for it if you're on Rumble. And I'm sure there'll be all manner of others that'll be lined up to destroy the ability to do anything of any practical situation anyway. So I don't know, maybe you'll get the let's go the full hog, shall we, and let's just suggest that perhaps the alphabet people might want to be getting involved as well via their little movements in the civil service, and perhaps their MAP members might want the military to help them to gain access to certain demographics. Why not? It has happened an awful lot within the one world of the United Nations, hasn't it? They've got a bit of a habit of that sort of thing, as I have covered in the past. I say you might think that's extreme, but like I say, if you do think that's extreme, you really haven't been paying attention, and you might want to understand the history of the United Nations, including the top pederast. Point 9 is going to be a bit of an issue in terms of recruiting the young, considering that the parallel agenda in education, which is there's certain parts of this and that will also be going into as we're continuing through. Also referred to a bit of it in the previous part 2. But the education system is literally built around making them hate their own country. So exactly how you're supposed to get the youngsters to join up to that, well, I suppose we can kind of come to that really, because point 11 is something that will allude towards solving that particular problem, because despite the fact that you do turn them into socialist gullible morons that hate their own country, they're also socialist morons in the fact that they're very capitalist minded, because they're then going to be looking towards how they can recruit the youngsters is that they can lower the standards. So presumably then you make room for your blue-haired soy boys that couldn't punch their way out of a wet paper bag. They can then join up, and I mean, they get the choice then. They can either turn the weapons on the country that they've been taught to hate, genius plan, or they can go into part 12, which is the bribery mode, and hence tweak on that little capitalist, in so much as they understand the term capitalist. It doesn't actually exist. Covered that one a long time ago. Basically, they're going to be using and abusing the artificial housing market, and because they've taken property ownership out of the hands of the young, and the potential for the young to be able to have any sort of ownership of housing at all. And so what they'll do is they'll dangle a house in front of them, persuade them that way. And obviously don't be surprised about the number of the catches that will come along with that, and see that particular bribery strategy fall down. But nevertheless, I'm sure that a lot of them will be stupid enough to fall for it. They also want flexi working, because that sounds good in the military, doesn't it? I suppose we should be grateful that they haven't mentioned that, you can join the military and work from home. There's still time for them to do it, I suppose. Absolutely retarded. Point 14 gives you another idea of how unqualified the people are that are writing this sort of drivel, because then they start referring to line managers. Oh dear. It just, like I say, you have to read this sort of stuff to believe how stupid these people are. Carrying on. Point 15 lets you know the thought police will be watching watching over anyone foolish enough to join up. And for anyone not understanding what this would mean, just remember how these ideologues are literally prosecuting former servicemen for their service. That's going to be one of those little catches that then removes the house from them. But you know, we're not talking about geniuses that are going to be recruited here because of that lowering of standards. But being part of the military by default should really mean that there should be a particular demeanour required within the lads. I'm not going to go down the road of saying the lasses, because no, it's military. But basically, you're going to have a problem if they do happen to get some of the lads with the right kind of demeanour, because they're not really going to be particularly reliable in terms of being able to follow instructions that do make sense. If they're going to be bombarded with whining from some Karen who's then going to be their line manager, this is not really going to be of much use in a military situation. So we're going to check on your behaviour and we're going to make sure that you don't say anything wrong. Not really conducive to that kind of environment, really, is it? Point 16 is the latest method of them saying how they will be pushing the DEI agenda, and so that means that then everybody can all collectively get together and go out and DIE as a result. Then we go into point 18. This is where you can kind of do a little bit of mathematical equations of 2 and 2 together and make this one defence and whole force by default to equate to NATO being the one world military. So, you know, good luck again gaining some sort of loyalty to that. Points 19 and 20. Where are we? No, I should be going back there, shouldn't I? No, I haven't got that far yet. I've just got I always forget my own notes. Moving on from point 18, I haven't got it on the screen, but points 19 and 20. And I've literally got it on the note saying I won't put it on the screen. Pay attention, you idiot. Essentially, points 19 and 20 is yet more validation coming from the NATO-only perspective. And then how the military won't be the source of education, because that might deflect from the standard sort of indoctrination of the education system. That was a good cock-up, wasn't it? And I'm going to leave it in just to piss myself off. Right, so then I will move on to the next slide. Idiot. This foundation side of things. I'm going to have a drink after that. Fucking idiot. Normally I'll try to edit out this sort of stuff and that, because I do this quite a lot. But I can't be bothered today. I'll do a Delling poll part, but never mind. Right, so understanding what they're doing in regard to the foundational skills means recognising this against historical programmes of a similar nature. And this is where I'm going to bring in something called, I think I might have mentioned this in some video in the past, and that possibly when I was doing the NHS, well, likely when I was doing the NHS, because Project 2000 was initiated in 1990, and this was directly related to the NHS, where they turned nursing and midwifery and those kinds of roles into a degree-based profession rather than the kind of vocation that it had been before. Now, when I'm saying that it was a vocation, I don't mean that the nurses and so forth were completely unskilled. What it meant was that they learnt their trade on the job, and it went from the lowest level of like cleaning up the crap on wards, cleaning up the crap on patients even, and it went right the way up to being the matron that a lot of people from like the 60s and 70s in particular would remember, who before this particular period, they were the ones that would not be messed with, and they were the ruler of the roost inside any sort of hospital, controlling multiple wards, not like the fake version that you have today. I mean, they could literally run an entire hospital to military precision. Unfortunately then, when you got this Project 2000 that was brought in, it was originally tried in America and then rejected because it was something that just made no sense. But what happened was it resulted in a bunch of completely incapable, educated, misery asses who wouldn't dream of breaking their nails to do any kind of dirty work, and they would sit in the tea room and that waiting for an administrative role. These were literally a group of people that was supposed to be doing the work that had been conducted before, now being done by what was called the HCAs, the healthcare assistants. Nurses and even, like I say, going through to midwives and things like that, they basically stopped doing the things that they were supposed to be doing. Midwife is not quite as bad as the nurse, but there's elements to it. The nursing in particular, and that really went downhill because they just don't do anything. So it basically made the so-called profession of nursing a complete and utter uncaring farce. So what you're going to end up with this so-called foundational skills for the integrated force scenario, you're going to get a bunch of problems that are going to fall along the same kind of lines, because this particular bunch of know-nothings that have put this document together, they're considering the 4 key skills to be part of the military foundation. And so what you're going to be ending up with there, and that is a brigade full of sergeant majors and no privates, if you understand what I mean from that. If they are of the delusion that military operations from now on, or if they can get their intended targets to wait until 2035, so that they can then be sort of, everybody's all fully remote by 2035, and if they believe that they can do all of these things and that while having absolutely zero puff and grunt boys, then yeah, marvelous. Who's anybody that's literally looking at all of this sort of stuff and going, hang on a minute, they're going to be attacking us, aren't they? Yeah, let's wait until 2035 when they think they're ready. You think that might actually cause them to be a little bit more incentivized to go, I think we might need to go a bit earlier than normal, or just go at all, because this is the intention, to be attacking others. There's nothing defensive about this. But basically, in that, I mean, if they're under this delusion that everything can be done with these people, with these so-called, and again, they have to bring in the AI things, and that, they have to be all educated in AI. Well, if you're educated in AI, then AI by default is not AI, is it? Anyway, if this is the sort of person that they want to be looking for a military of the future, just put out a competition and get all the best players of Call of Duty, for crying out loud. Because it really won't make any difference, will it? But meanwhile, back in the real world, assuming, all fighting will be elsewhere, because that's also something else that they don't really seem to be taking into consideration. What we will have is a defence force that has absolutely no readiness to defend our own ground. You won't have the puff and grunt boys to defend the home nation. I mean, I can't state enough how much of a serious error this is from civil servants, which is why civil servants shouldn't be anywhere near this sort of thing. Ignore the need for our lads at your peril. This is utterly stupid. So off the back of this nonsense, then they'll go into be making their recommendations, which, you know, I'm not going to start doing a repeat of here's what they said and here's their recommendations off of the back of it, because I mean it basically just ends up covering the same thing twice and just bulking out a document. Really doesn't really serve much of a purpose. But within their recommendations from 14 to 20, it basically just repeats everything that I've just put on the screen, so there's no need to do it. But it really, there's reasons why you don't let certain people run certain types of things. And there's certain other comments I'll make about all this at the end anyway. So then we go into areas around the so-called, you know, allies and partners. Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I suppose we should be minorly grateful in that they still recognise the US as the main partner by putting them first and foremost. But it might be an idea for them to sort of pass the memo around to all of the government personnel, including the idiots that wrote this, because so they understand that they don't get to decide who the President of the United States is. And so if they don't happen to like the President of the United States at that time, tough titty, get over yourselves. Sometimes their ideological insults can be rather expensive mistakes. And what I do find within their small part in recognising the US here is that they can't help mentioning other nations when they're supposed to be sticking to the US in this particular set of small information. That's indicative of the kind of mindset that we're dealing with here. And I have said before that the UK is absolutely heavily dependent on the US for actual innovation because of our command and control economy, which means there's no incentive for anybody to do anything here. And they blatantly avoid that particular fact of the matter, because that would be to admit that we do have a command and control economy. They're not going to do that, are they? So I don't think these people understand the reality of the situation at all. But then, you know, that's this type of agenda all over. These people are void of reality in its entirety. Obviously, they're going to spend a lot more on NATO and the EU, aren't they? That's going to be their priority, because that's where the bulk of the cult belongs. Now, I did point out before that you have this Trinity House agreement with Germany, and how that makes absolutely no sense at all. But in case everybody didn't know this, it doesn't stop with Germany. Now, I've put some links in the description for some similar types of agreement which are in place with France, Poland and Norway. And once again, I see absolutely zero reason for any of this. France isn't a shock for the same reason that I stated when I discussed the Trinity House agreement, because what I said before, and that is that France and Germany don't seem to, you know, the rules of the European Union don't seem to apply to them. They just force it on other nations across the European Union. Obviously, Norway is not a member of the EU, though it is a member of the, what's it called, the EEA. Um, and obviously, in that when it comes down to Norway, because we fund their EV market by buying their oil and gas, it's not a particular shock that we would have an agreement with them. And so it's Poland that we have to give a bit of consideration to here, and why it is that we would have a standalone agreement with them. What you have to understand then with Poland is their location right beside the Ukraine, which between the two of them represents a kind of a wall between the EU and Russia. It's also why they're probably so desperate to bring the Ukraine into the fold, in addition to having used the Ukraine as a source of corruption and field testing. Now, obviously, this does kind of dismiss to a certain degree Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia as being potential expendables. That's largely because these are relatively quite small countries, but they will still have the backing of the EU and therefore hence NATO. So if they were to be touched by Russia, hey ho, here we go type of scenario. But what this all means is that there is this geographical blockade that means that Russia would be left with Belarus as the only real kind of allied nation, leading towards the wider part of the European continent. I know people like to call Russia Europe as well, and that, but if we was to consider Russia the east of Europe, then the line coming west, effectively. So strategically, some people might say that it makes a little bit of sense to have a kind of a buffer zone, or rather this wall that makes up the larger nations of Poland and Ukraine. But it also does make sense for us to have a kind of an independent line, something where you don't, neither side crosses over. Now, if we was to do that, that would mean Ukraine, Belarus, and then probably those three nations of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. But obviously, the encroachment of the EU has already taken up much of this, and so it was kind of inevitable that some kind of excuse for bringing the Ukraine into the fold was going to be undertaken. And we know that this has been taking place, and that since pre-2014 anyway. You can kind of sort of like, if you understand, despite the fact that people do like to try to forget all of this stuff and that, but the Ukraine itself, and that spent 8 years bombing its own people along the Donbass and along that the region above me, that where the Russians have so-called invaded. They've basically taken over those areas where Ukraine was literally attacking them anyway, because most of the people that lived in that area were effectively Russian. If there had been any sort of realistic proposition of maintaining some kind of a buffer zone, or some kind of an independent landmass between the two, well, the chances are that the European Union wouldn't have had the big bogeyman in Russia that they are using as the excuse to push a lot of this kind of rhetoric in the first place. Because if any of the rhetoric was to actually make sense, when you consider that Russia has taken over this small part of the Ukraine to stop them having their own people being bombed, And that's supposed to be the bogeyman, the bad thing that is not allowed. But then when it comes down to the European Union, it's literally a case of it's okay when we do it because you've brought in Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. That it literally is the okay when we do it scenario. They're the ones that have been encroaching towards Russia, and yet when Russia encroaches back, oh no 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 no. Now you can turn around and you will have the people that say, no, but these countries they chose to come into the European Union. It was done peacefully. Well, originally Ukraine had peacefully turned around and said, no, we don't want to join the European Union. Which is why you then got the colour revolution, and that's why you got the guys getting poisoned. That's why they started bombing the fucking Donbass and everything like that, in order to be able to create this situation. So, you know, the whole Ukraine brigade, and that needs to seriously wind their neck in. Now, considering the document does constantly refer to the Ukraine, including within this section as well, and that apparently we're obliged to give them $3 billion a year for the rest of eternity, despite them not yet being part of the European Union. And even if they were part of the European Union, then it's their problem, shouldn't be ours. But then, are we not a part of the European Union still anyway? Never mind. It will end up being the usual sort of we are, we're not, the denial and all the rest of it. Avoidance of reality. I think the combination of Poland and Ukraine as this wall of protection from against Russia, which wasn't needed, but that's basically, I think, the reason why they've concentrated on having this agreement with Poland. There are certain things that are taking place in Poland that I do very much find interesting, but how much of that is going to be a continuation, I don't know, because when you understand the levels of development that are being taken forward within Poland, how much of that is being enabled at the moment because of this, their considered importance of this wall, and how much of it is going to be interfered with when you have to keep in mind that the population numbers were manipulated in order to get that Donald Tusk back in office. And at the moment, as is basically now a well-established pattern within the European Union, they are currently looking to overturn the election of, if I can say his name properly, Karol Nawrocki. I don't know if that's right. Because he was basically kind of like more on the conservative side. He's not a part of their cult. He was voted in as the so is it Tusk is the president and Nawrocki is the prime minister, something like that. But basically, because he's not one of Tusk's lot, they're just literally going to turn around and say, Russia, Russia, Russia interference. No, that's not allowed. You have to vote in our cult or else. It literally is vote and vote until we get the result we want. That is the European Union now. So whether that will then cause a problem with some of the developments in sort of proper economic developments in Poland, whether that will have an effect on that, I don't know. This is something that we're going to have to say. I would imagine it probably will. Like I say, the problem that we've got across the whole of the European continent at the moment is this complete lack of democratic system, and it's quite ridiculous, really, that they're all going on about how Russia is the problem and Russia wants to create the former Soviet Union, and yet what they are creating as an opposition to that is literally the EU SSR. They've got their Fourth Reich plan in place, and they're not going to have it interrupted by anybody that will say anything different. So democracy in Europe is dead. This is something that should be playing a part in considerations within the UK, because, like I said, then that puts us in terms of the reality of the world. That puts us in direct conflict with the old enemy. But no, we're going to appease this time. We're going to be a part of it. I mean, this is why I'm just having some basic historical understanding. This is the sort of reasoning why people have, for the longest time, have understood that this path of the European Union was going hell bent for everything that we knew damn well was going to be in the wrong direction. And it is basically the reason why the powers that be in the UK are absolutely adamant that we do not have the Brexit that we voted for. The same level of anti-democracy that you have in the European Union, it's at play in the UK as well. Because I say we didn't get Brexit. Despite them turning around and saying, "Oh, Brexit has caused this and that and the other." No, it didn't, because we haven't actually left. It doesn't matter what bullshit narrative these people want to come out with. And up to and including, there was an email that came through last night because of that petition about having a referendum on the EU army. Apparently, according to the message last night, they said that the government's response to that was actually inadequate, and that they need to respond again in a... I'm sure that they're going to try to say, well, no, you have to respond in a way that is at least giving a little bit more bullshit to try to placate people. But I've actually got the notion that I think they're going to have a full EU referendum again, and it's going to be fixed to make sure that we're officially back in what we'd never left in the first place, so that this entire plan can just carry on as it was heading in the first place. I don't know. I think we've got serious problems coming down the road anyway, because you don't have this kind of situation of them telling you exactly what was going to be happening and with whom, and then follow what the British people have said, and where we've literally turned around and said, no, we don't want to be part of that. But they are going to keep pushing forward and say, no, you are. It doesn't matter what you've said. We are part of it. We're ignoring you completely. You have no sovereignty. You are not a part of this democracy, our Fourth Reich democracy. You're not part of it. Continuing through with what is written there, there is mention of Italy and an agreement to come there, where the mention that they have there, and that is the so-called protection of the southern flank. The southern flank. I think that's actually less of a factor as to why they would want to have any kind of a deal with Italy, and it would probably be more to do with bringing in the firm that used to be called, I mean, when I knew them and that, they were called Finmeccanica. Now they're called Leonardo. Typical, isn't it? I think the agreement is to make sure that they stay involved. I think they've still got a large facility out in Essex. But because that's such a big player in the defence manufacturing sector, that would be the only reason why they would bring them into the fold. There is also mention of Turkey along similar lines of set together some kind of agreement, but I wouldn't be surprised really if we saw some degradation of the relationship there. The size of the military manufacturing in Turkey is not something anybody would be dependent upon, and I suspect the main thing that anybody would miss as far as Turkey is concerned is the white goods market. That would probably be more of a loss than anything else. So I suppose it comes down to how much the European Union are going to keep interfering there, and if they're going to keep pushing this Erdogan into even further towards this new delusion that he's got as well, and that of recreating the Ottoman Empire. Good luck with that. I mean, are they at some point in that going to make Turkey the enemy? Because you've got to create enemies. If you're building a war machine, you've got to have an enemy, haven't you? And if you've managed to defeat one, well, then you need to create another one, don't you? You've got to have your forever war. But as you can guess from the title page that I've chosen, which comes from that Starship Troopers, and do understand some of the ideology that was behind the creation of Starship Troopers, I do definitely see this EU SSR project as being the project that had been an ideology that fails its people, fails its economies, and fails in all aspects of logic, decency, independence, sovereignty, everything. And it'll just do the usual last bastion of the ideologue and just go full out to say, oh yeah, everything is all about war. We hide all of our failures behind saying, no, it's all about war. That's all these people have ever got. Having the UK being part of this downward spiral is not wise. So then we go to their beyond the EU. In addition to this particular segment, this so-called defence strategy goes into how the UK should be working outside of NATO members. And then they start off here and that with mention of the Middle East and those countries that they haven't bombed yet. We're only selling bombs to them because you've got to give them some bombs to make it look like a war when you do attack them. Despite the fact that whenever you attack anything in the Middle East, they all run a mile. But the Indo-Pacific is then the next subject matter, and that which basically they're just talking about China. I mean, why call it the Indo-Pacific when they're just concentrating on China? And apparently they want the nation's relationship with China to be based entirely around the military, because of course they do. That sounds like a genius plan, doesn't it? There's a bit of brevity towards Australia, Japan, and then the Five Eyes, where apparently, according to point 15, we have to do this in combination with the European Union again, the old EU SSR, because we're not allowed to do anything on our own. And then there's finally some mention of the fact that we do have some overseas territories. They've remembered that, in as much as it's worth remembering, considering they've given them up as well. But to see how well we're served in these overseas territory locations, they do provide us with a handy little map. And so I'm sure the world is absolutely going to be trembling in their boots at the sight of our 8,500 mix of military and civil servants. I particularly like the mention of Gibraltar, because as if that's a big presence, and considering that they've handed the border over to Spain, so basically it's the European Union, isn't it? This is just so retarded. There's, again, straight after this, you get various pages of just basically repeating the same old garbage that's already been covered, so they can pretend that they've got lots of pages written and that, and they've done a very detailed report. they're not mentioning within this particular part of that they are also going through this decolonisation program, which is going to be giving away a lot of our overseas territories. So even that mighty 8,500 is going to be reduced. It's utterly, the whole thing is just a big farce. When we get to the end of this particular stage, we then get into this the whole society. What was that, a moth? I'm just going to show the front page for this particular section because this is sort of giving an indication of what I'm going to be going into next. Because I'm not going to run through it now. I'll leave that till part 4. But the thing about this whole society approach that I can already state is that that particular map that I've got up there, and that this is the Orwell's 1984 map, and how in 1984 we're in this forever war with East Asia. Now, what you might be able to tell from Orwell's map is that he put the UK as part of Oceania, rather than what we're getting in reality, which is that we are part of Eurasia. That's the determination that they've got for us. But the principle is basically the same, really, where everyone has to be a part of this war machine, and everybody's going to be in this continuous battle with whoever. And the whole of society has to revolve around being involved in this forever war. Because there's going to be plenty of countries and that for them to pick on. I say, I mean, don't be surprised if you see. I mean, if you've seen the population video that I did, don't be surprised if you get things like Nigeria coming into the mix. It's not just going to stick with the Middle East, because they're going to have the new threat. I suppose the point can already realistically be made, and and I will still continue going through the document, but it's something, it'll be something that just gets emphasised more and more as I'm going forward. But this is not a defence review. This is literally yet another document that falls along the line of all of the other documents that have come before, and this is how the country is going to be run according to this particular ideology. This is a document that says who is going to run the country. This is a document that is saying what all of your geopolitical policies are going to be. This is removing any level of input from the sovereign people. It is that argument that I've presented before, and that where they turn around and say, Parliament is sovereign. No, it isn't. No, it isn't. The people are sovereign, not Parliament. But this type of lunacy is definitely removing the people from that process. It shouldn't be a surprise anymore, realistically, because each and every supposed advisory document that comes out all points towards the exact same result, and it's an illusion now that anybody's voice matters. The path of all directions of the country has been predetermined, and all you have to do now is just put on the uniform, shut your mouth, and wait to be told what to do. Obviously, I've still got about 60 pages to go on this, but suffice to say, in terms of a policy suggestion for anybody getting any kind of potential breakthrough and being able to pull apart some of this cultist ideology, anybody that's got any sort of respect for the nation, one of the first things that they absolutely will have to do is tearing down all of the people that are responsible for putting out what I consider to be treasonous publications. Because this is very much a situation of treason against the nation. When you are literally doing everything to remove the sovereignty of the people, and you are looking to have us be dictated to, I mean, of all things, that why would anybody in their right mind want to be dictated to by a failed folk singer from Germany? I mean, it's bad enough that we've got a pretend king from Germany as it is, but that silly bint, my God. I mean, it is something that we are going to have to it is something we are effectively going to have to hope that not just within the UK, but people across the whole European continent just turn around and say, we're just not doing this. We are not doing this. Why in God's name would everybody agree to going with turning your entire continent into a big military organisation? Just because you've got people like Rachel from accounts that doesn't know how to do accounts. Because that's effectively what it all boils down to. The finances are so utterly abysmal because they didn't know how to do that either, that they're trying to hide it all by making everybody be in the military. They said that the 1930s Germany plan, hence why I keep referring to things like the Fourth Reich, hence why the Starship Troopers thing and that those particular uniforms, somewhat reminiscent of the SS, weren't they? It has been stated by many people in various different forms of exactly where this ideology leads to. And they are literally doing it. They're producing the documents that tell you that they're doing it. And people are just not paying attention to it. All of this fast distraction of saying, oh, like if we get women involved, everything is going to be so much more pleasant and nice. Really? How's that working out? Oh, and if we don't have things like hate speech, if everybody all loves each other, and here's a gun to go and prove your love. The rhetoric side that they come out with and the reality of what they're doing, there is no match. When you've got an ideology that has to absolutely be so dependent on such grotesque manipulation for people to be a bit like that, like where it started in the 1960s, really, and that with the hippies, which were nowhere near as dominant as they like to try to make out, but you know, the old peace and love written on a hammer as they hit you over the head with it, because that's effectively the exact type of situation that you had in those days. It's just a bigger version of that. Oh, we're going to be so tolerant of everybody that you know, here's your machine gun and go and be tolerant against people. Bang, 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 bang. This is lunacy. Sheer lunacy. And for people to not understand this or not recognise it, or just literally put in there, you know, doing the three wise monkeys and pretending it's not happening. Oh, it's happening, all right. It just depends on whether anybody's going to try to do something about it or not, doesn't it? I mean, out in Europe, the likes of your Spain and Portugal and whatever, and that, instead of them all gathering together and that and going through the streets and squirting their little water pistols to get rid of the tourists that aren't the problem, maybe they might want to consider that their own governments are completely fucking insane. Maybe that would be an idea. But there you go. What can you do? Well, hopefully you can do some of the things that I've been advising for a very, very, very long time now. Forget the party system, get your competent independents, get in there with your election results, provide the evidence of your election results, do not give them an inch, and for God's sake, take the houses back. That's the only way you're going to stop it. Because it doesn't matter what the face is. It doesn't matter whether you've got bloody Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, bloody Starmer. It doesn't matter if you've got Rachel from Accounts with her little boohoo feel sorry for me. Because, you know, I just killed a lot of pensioners over the winter and that by removing their fuel allowance. But, you know, I shed 2 tears in Parliament. So therefore everybody has to be on their knees and begging for my well-being. Fuck the people you just killed. That's the sort of stupid situation we're in at the moment. I don't know. And you wonder why I drink. Not to any great excess, so don't worry about that. Not that you would, but anyway. So I suppose that's a bit of a rant, and that at this sort of gone past the halfway point. I think some of the stuff that I'll be going through in the next couple of parts is, like I say, is to do with this whole society thing and that. And I think there might be some areas where they actually touch on the equipment side of things, and we'll see how realistic that is. But, you know, spread this sort of stuff around. That let people have their own understanding of this. You know, are the people out there that are reading this document and go, oh yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Justify it to me. Does anybody have to justify it to me? Probably not. But give it a go anyway. Because I can't see this making any fucking sense whatsoever. So, the more people understand what these documents are, because I mean, they really do hope that nobody reads this stuff. But the more that people do read it and do get to see things, and, you know, people actually having done the job for them, maybe they might have a bit of a brain fart. Yeah, I mean, like your 20% of your leftist lunatics and that, I mean, nothing will touch them, they're gone. But let's try for the rest of them, eh? Anyway, I think I've gone on for long enough. So I'll see you in the next part, which I'll try to get something out in the middle of the week, and that's so I can get past this particular part and get back to doing the audit. All right then, cheers. See you next time. Bye-bye.